Oh, can we all just take a second to appreciate how great trim is? It covers the gap where your floor doesn't quite meet your wall. And then when you're plastering your walls, you don't have to plaster all the way down to the floor. You can leave the back of it and then just cover it with a piece of wood. It's great. As a home builder, I really appreciate it, and that's why it bothers me to see trim in so many houses done so poorly. In my own house, I've got some pretty bad trim, so on this episode of Zach Builds, I'm going to show you guys how you can touch up your trim with very minimal effort and make it look a lot better. This is one of those projects that's pretty great if you're stuck at home right now. You don't need a lot of materials for this, and you can do it in an afternoon. So let's get started. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So in my experience, there's two very common issues with trim that I see a lot. I happen to have an example of both of them right here. The first is cracking where it meets the wall. And this can either be caused by improper original installation or just things kind of shifting and moving as time goes on. And then the other common thing I see is just really poor installation. Not taking the time to fill the nail heads that secure the trim to the wall, or being extra lazy and doing weird stuff like not painting the end. So let me show you guys the tools and materials that you're gonna need to take care of something like this. To start, you're gonna need some white latex caulking. I have the fast dry stuff here because it makes the turnaround time a little bit quicker. You're gonna need a caulking gun to dispense that caulking. You are going to need some sort of filler. I have a little bit of spackle here, but wood filler works too. And then you're gonna need a sanding sponge to sand that same filler. The other thing you're gonna need is some paint that's the same color as the trim and a paintbrush to apply it with. Oh yeah, and you're also going to need a damp rag as well. Let's start with the cracking around the top of the trims. To start, we're gonna cut a small hole in the tip of our caulking container, and then we're gonna load it into the caulking gun. And then you'll wanna squeeze the trigger until the caulking gun is primed and ready to go. And that's what we have the damp rag for, to clean up the caulking. All right, let's go back to the trim. Then first things first, we're just gonna give it a quick clean with that damp rag, make sure it's ready to be caulked. And then you're gonna take your caulking gun and you are just going to gently lay a bead of caulking into the corner where the crack is. And then once your bead is applied, just take your finger and squeegee off the excess. Now you might want to do it a couple times and get it nice and clean. And voila, no more crack. Now, some people will kind of cheat and use caulking to fill the nail heads as well. And you can do that, but the problem with that is that when the caulking dries, it shrinks a little bit. So you often end up with little indentations and you can still kind of see where the nail heads are. We'll fill those later with the spackle and you'll see you'll get a much better finish if you take the time to use a spackle. But if you're in a rush, caulking works too. Just around the corner here, we have a little bit more of a crack. This time it's in the quarter round. Let's go ahead and fill that. And again, you don't really need to overdo it with the caulking, just a nice small bead, and then wiping off the excess with your finger. And sometimes for really tight corners, I'll even just take the rag and just go right over the top of it. All right, let's find a couple more. Over here in my office, we have a particularly egregious one here. Let me move this and then I'll show you. All right, check this out. This one is just so bad. I look at it every day when I'm in the office and it always bugs me. It's gonna feel good to fix this one. As a general rule of thumb, if you have a crack in an inside corner, like this one here is, you can use a little bit of caulking to touch that up. Trying to do that one-handed, it's a little tricky. There goes the camera. But if it's outside corner, I would take the time and I would use a spackle or a wood filler to do it. As you're working, your rag's probably gonna get pretty covered in caulking, so take the time and rinse it off as you work because you wanna keep your hands nice and clean while you're doing this. Good to go. All right, so while we wait for the caulking to dry, let's talk about applying the spackle. I've been a long-time proponent that you don't need any tools when you're applying spackle because you were born with the most important tool. You can use a putty knife or something like that if you want to be fancy, but I think just scooping a little bit onto your fingertip and pushing it into the holes is going to be your best bet. So find all your little nail holes, push a little putty into them. The less putty you can apply, the better. This is a much better example than this one here. And again, you can use your little rag to wipe it back. There we go. That's probably a little too little. You want to try and leave the putty a little bit high so that you can sand it off afterwards. And also, you might have noticed I have pink spackle. That's because this is a color change spackle, so it's actually really handy. Once this dries, it's going to go from pink to white, so we'll know exactly when we can sand it. So earlier I said that inside corners should be touched up using the caulking, while outside corners should be touched up using the spackle or the wood filler. And you're just trying to work it into all those little gaps, right down to the floor. And then we come around the corner and keep going. Feels pretty dry. Spackle has now turned white, so I'm pretty sure we are ready to sand it a little bit. And when it comes to sanding, I really like to use these little sanding sponges because they're soft, and when you press them against round trim, they can kind of conform to the shape of the trim itself. Sanding the trim isn't really rocket science. You're just going to go back and forth until the trim is nice and smooth. You might also want to just give the rest of the trim a quick sand too in order to knock down any little high spots. Take a quick second, vacuum up all the dust from sanding. If you're anything like me, you might be thinking that you're now done. And I can't blame you because it probably looks pretty good right now. You have a couple different shades of white, but they're probably pretty close to one another, and it all looks pretty good. But I would caution you against that because as time goes on, that filler and especially the caulking are gonna start to discolor and accumulate dirt, and they're not gonna look as good in 3 or 4 weeks as they do right now. That's why you have to apply a layer of paint over the top. So in my case, I have a pretty easy job because my trim is painted the same color as the wall. So I don't really have to be very careful when I'm applying this paint. Let's see, that's not bad. So I got my nice trim painting brush here. Just dip a little bit of that in and we are ready to go. So just a quick layer of paint right over the top of everything. This is also a good opportunity to take care of any little spots like this that weren't painted in the past. So I'm just gonna mask off the floor with a little bit of painter's tape and take care of that ugly, unsightly end. I'm not the best at cutting with a brush, so whenever there's an area that's a little tricky to reach, I like to use a little bit of painter's tape to mask it off. And just like that, no more cracks, no more exposed nail holes, and no more weird unpainted sections. Alright, so I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Zach's Quarantine Tips. If you did, I would love it if you could give me a thumbs up and hit subscribe. And if you guys have any other little home repair jobs you'd like to see me do, let me know down below in the comments and I will try and make that happen for you. Alright guys, see you in the next video. Peace.